Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are speaking about the complexities, intersections, and emotional backlash when women seek child maintenance. After the break, we're going to be speaking to Felicity Guest, who is an internationally acclaimed financial abuse specialist and the founder of Child Maintenance Difficulty South Africa, a Facebook group that has been helping and tackling maintenance issues. And we'll also be speaking to Chelsea Maxwell from the organization Mosaic about the role of the child in child maintenance issues. But before that, we are going to have a look at a short video, which is a testimony from a child who is in the middle of a child maintenance battle. Let's hear what he has to say.
Year leading up to the divorce, we had moved from living in England to here in South Africa, where we have been since. They got divorced in July of 2014, but in the period leading up to that, we had to attend lots of meetings with people at courts. One of these meetings was when we had to meet at the Family Advocate's office. This was to work out which parent I would live with after they got divorced. And this was one of the better experiences for me, because there was always someone at the Family Advocate's office to tell me what was happening. They told me what would be happening that day, who I would be speaking to, and roughly how long it would take, so I knew what was happening. My parents went and met with the advocate, and I was interviewed by the social worker, and I was 8 years old at the time. I think the meeting with the family advocate was a difficult one because my parents were not in speaking terms, and they still are not in speaking terms. But recently, when one of the speakers here today said that whenever he does mediation with couples that are at war with each other, he places a photo of the child on the table and just stares at the couple, stares at the photo, not the couple, stares at the photo while the couple argues. When I heard that, I felt like I was the child he was talking about, and looking back, I felt quite safe talking to a complete stranger. Even though my mom went with a heavy heart, I remember her saying she felt better after coming out the meeting with the family advocate. My parents got divorced soon after the family advocate's report arrived, and for about a year after the divorce, my dad was paying maintenance. He stopped paying maintenance after my mom was diagnosed with colon cancer and ended up landing in the hospital. That was when things got really bad, as my mom had lots of medical bills and she was temporarily boarded from work. She contacted the maintenance officer at the magistrate's court, and two people came to our home to speak with her. It all seemed fine and that things would work out. And by this, I mean that my dad would probably start paying maintenance and make life a bit easier for us. But now that I'm older, I can see the difference between the different courts we were at over the years. My mom went to the maintenance court more than 20 times, and there was always some sort of excuse as to why they had not done anything about our matter. This meant that she had to take off work every time. And when I read a charge sheet recently, I noticed the number of times that there was a warrant of arrest issued and then cancelled within the same day. The warrant was issued, then cancelled because my dad did not appear at court at the scheduled time, but would often appear later the same day. Sometimes the folders would go missing, and as young as I was at the time, I knew that the courts are not very efficient, and that every time my mum went there, she would come back crying from frustration and disappointment. I then started to dread her going to court, as I knew that she would be wasting her time and come back sad. On another level, I always looked forward to seeing my mom after she came from court, because I hoped that the maintenance would be sorted and that we could live more comfortably. Through all of this, she was on chemo, but also had a second job to help pay bills. By that time, I was 9 or 10, but I knew that the courts were not looking after us, and I feared for my mom's health. A big problem was that the investigations were often not done properly, so it appeared that my dad was not by the means to pay any money. Eventually, the magistrate ruled that my dad was not by the means to pay anything. Since 2015, I was still in primary school. To this day, where I am in year 12 and a prefect at my school, he has not bought me something as inexpensive as a pencil. My mom still works 2 jobs so that we can survive every month, and what this has taught me through the 10 years of going through court systems is that courts are scared of standing with the victims of domestic violence. I say this because financial abuse falls under the greater category of domestic abuse. I am one child that is still being failed by the justice system, and there are tens of thousands of other children being failed equally. My wish is to speak to a room full of magistrates and maintenance court employees so that I can tell them what it feels like to be hung out to dry by their decisions. I also would like to share with them what it feels like when your parent comes home from court saying that absolutely nothing happened and we are still in the same position. I would also like to tell them what it feels like to have one parent go to court for 10 years only to be told that she has to take care of me on her own. As I mentioned earlier, I was 8 years old when this court journey started, and by Christmas this year, I will have a driver's license. I would not wish the horror of a maintenance journey on anybody, and I can only hope that somewhere somebody decides to do some training with the decision makers, because children suffer emotionally as well as financially when poor decisions are made. Thank you.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and today we are speaking about mothers seeking maintenance, and other women who are mothers who are also navigating the child maintenance system. And one of the reasons I wanted to go into that, as my disclaimer earlier said, we know that men are also custodial parents and that they also seek maintenance. But the statistics show that the majority of those are women who are navigating this system. And we also wanted to dig deeper than just the legalities of it, because we all know there are tons of stereotypes about women and money that sort of play into this topic. And here with me today to help me unpack this issue is Felicity Guest, who is an internationally accredited financial abuse specialist and the founder of a Facebook group called Child Maintenance Difficulties South Africa that was founded 10 years ago. And then we also have Chelsea Mamwell, who is a social worker with Mosaic. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, Felicity, I wanted to start with you because I thought before we dig into all of those other things, it's good for us to get a definition of what child maintenance is. And part of that is because often it seems to be this legal battle between parents or adults, and yet we wanted to sort of just reassert this is seeking money for the maintenance of the child, right? But maybe you can just take us through what is child maintenance.
Sure. So I think a good starting point is Section 28 of the Constitution, which is the duty to care for children. And part of that care is financially providing for the child. So the money is essentially, child maintenance is essentially to maintain the child, to provide the 5 absolute basics for a child, which is education, healthcare, clothing, shelter, and food. And then depending on one's means, then all of the other stuff. Because, I mean, South Africa is still one of the most unequal countries in the world. And according to the standard of living that children are accustomed to who are born from a marriage, that could vary what child support actually means. But I think we need to emphasize providing, because if we talk just about money, then there's a perception that the child only needs money. And it's this whole connotation around money. But if we look at it as providing, that could also mean providing food. Because if one is unemployed and doesn't have the financial means, it doesn't mean you're absolved from providing for your child. I still maintain, go around and ask your friends and family for vegetables, the very, very least, and give those to the mother so that she can keep her children alive.
That's a really, really great point. And I know when I was following your group, one of the things was like when we're talking about babies, nappies, right? And being able to get like nappies for the kid. But I mean, we'll get to that as well. But thank you so much for raising that. Chelsea, you are a social worker. And I think before the show, I said to you, we've had social workers on, we've spoken about child maintenance before, but we never quite brought those together. Often when we have social workers on, we're speaking about issues like domestic violence and child abuse and so forth. And I know working for Mosaic that you deal with those issues. But I also, when I was thinking about who is best to bring on to speak about child maintenance within the sort of psychological and emotional context, I thought social workers must also be dealing with this if you are dealing with domestic violence, for example, or any partner-related sort of relationships. Tell us what you do and how child maintenance can feature into this work.
So, of course, I am the social worker at Mosaic. So I work within the areas of Mitchell's Plain, Tafelsig, and the surrounding areas within Mitchell's Plain. And, of course, working with abuse survivors, the couples who are going through a divorce due to abuse, you'd find that as a result of the abuse, there's a lot of tension between who will take custody of the child, who will take care of the child, who will see to the needs of the child. And in that, of course, you find the maintenance conversation coming up. And surprisingly, what I've been able to see is that the clients that I've dealt with, maintenance has become something that's not necessarily something they're ashamed of doing, but rather it comes from a point of maybe not being educated enough in knowing what's the legal steps I must take. So I think that's how I've been encountering the maintenance conversation within the client work done within Mitchell's Plain. There are many mothers even specifically that, and if you think about the areas of Mitchell's Plain, there's a lot of poverty and a lot of needs that's also needed within families. And in the conversation of maintenance, I find that it's mainly coming from a point of maybe not knowing very clearly what's the step they must take. So you find that people are like suffering in terms of taking care of children because they don't know the legal steps that they can take in going to the court and putting in a request for maintenance for the care of the children. I think that's the biggest thing I've been able to actually see.
Okay, great. Can I ask, and I know I'm going to come back to you also about some of the things that have come up in the group over 10 years of, watching people and assisting people seeking maintenance. But you also find, and this is something I wanted to explore, when I speak about stereotypes about women and money, and I'm going to be broad here. Often when you put that together in any context, I want to use another context as a sort of metaphor. Women who are seeking a lot of money or want to create wealth, let's just say, or asking for their days, it's a very different context where it's very acceptable for men to go after a lot of money or to seek a lot of the highest money, but women are contextualized very differently. And so even in relationships, actually, my cousin, who shall remain unnamed, sent me a message the other day, WhatsApp the other day, and she said her son met this girl they were away on holiday, and he says he asked if she had some money so that he could buy them ice cream, right? So he asked, and then she said, "Oh, well, because he's got a card." She's like, "Why don't you use a card?" And he says, "Well, I don't want her to know I have a bank card. What if she follows me home, right?" And so there's this like gold digger mentality, just like from small, we hear it in music, we see it in films, we have. And so this mentality for me, I mean, coming from a history where women were excluded economically, were not able to have a bank account, were given allowances to seek the home, were policed, I feel that a lot of that spills over even into the maintenance space, regardless of how much you are looking for. If you are seeking money from someone, there's a negative sort of connotation there. And so I wanted to ask you if any of that filters through there, whether there's a space where you're saying shame doesn't necessarily come up, but sometimes accusations come up. Do you see that narrative?
We do actually see it coming up here. I think mainly because, of course, Mosaic works with both the survivor and the perpetrator at times. You'd have that both of them wants to see the social worker, and it comes into a point where the opposite party, maybe the father, would make claims such as the mother has other malicious intents in making this request, but of course that could be just based on his perception of her when it's actually not the reality. So we do see it coming up quite often as well.
And Felicity, how about you? How's that come up? And I just want to tag on there. So often in that conversation where there's a lot of accusations going about just money being asked or requested or sought, the needs of the child then gets lost. Right? How has it showed up in your group over the 10 years? And I know that's a big question because you've been doing this a long time.
One, I agree with you that women are reluctant to ask for too much money. And I think there is definitely women ask for bare minimal. And I think that's based on they don't actually know legally what maintenance can cover, what they can claim for. And also it's a path of least resistance. Just interesting observations. One is that if we look at families, what are families? And if majority of children are born out of marriage, so I think we need to be very mindful of that.
Thank you.
Because they're very different scenarios. Because if you are in a committed relationship or marriage, there is in the majority of cases, a financial dependence on the provider, who in the majority is men. So there's an imbalance of power there because he who controls the money controls you, consciously or unconsciously. If you don't have income or don't have enough, particularly when you have children, is you have to ask. So, that's a conversation all on its own. What are the dynamics within the relationship to be able to ask for money? Do you have to justify? Because where it becomes abusive is in that process. If you observe how couples talk about money, it can show up whether there's abuse or not, whether people are afraid or not, whether they have to justify it. And then if we look at the single mother, and we also have to be mindful that not all single mothers fall pregnant and have children out of choice. A lot of it is, as a result of sexual coercion and rape. And not all of them choose to abort. So there's very different scenarios, and that's why it's important to understand the individual situation. But if we move along to the maintenance process, it's supposed to be a simple system. One is supposed to be able to go to court, the clerk is supposed to help you complete the form, and it's supposed to be a simple process. But there are so many barriers, because there is the stigma attached. And many women on the group say that when they go to court, they feel disrespected by the clerk. And there's a lack of willingness to just assist them to fill in the form, because to them it might be a simple form, but it is actually not very user-friendly. If we take the different languages, it's written in English. Not everybody really understands English. If we go to semi-rural and rural, and even within our informal settlements, they don't understand what it all means. So they don't get the help to fill it in, so that they ask for the bare minimal there. And it's difficult when you start from bare minimal to try and increase it once you actually get to the hearing. But one of the biggest barriers is actually finding the fathers of the children. Because they don't know how to do that, or they don't know that the courts are actually mandated, but the courts don't have the resources. So how do you even start looking for the person? And it's not always, one night stand or anything. Often it's from a committed relationship. They disappear because they don't want to be found. And I think there's a lot of social complexities around it, and some of my research has shown that there are fathers are biological, they are social, and they're financial. So in a committed relationship, they are probably all of them. They're package. And the interesting observations are that the moment the relationship ends, then we start seeing it becoming fragmented. The father doesn't always show up as a social father, and then he's not going to show up as a financial father. And the interesting thing is that the research shows us that men appear to invest in their children through the women in their lives. So when she is no longer part of his life, his children don't benefit. If he gets into another relationship and she has children, he will show up as the social and the financial father because he wants to please her. He wants to keep her. So he withdraws the financial and the social parenting from his own children and invests it in somebody else's children. And we expect women to stand up for women, and because that's how we hold men accountable. She is probably a victim of the same thing. So the cycle continues. She's probably so happy to have somebody provide and parent her own children, and she doesn't want to jeopardize that. Because the moment she starts holding him accountable, then he goes, well, are you not grateful? Is this, and it starts, and you don't want to jeopardize that, particularly if you have a lack. So they're very complex issues to understand and to unpack. But that's why when I coach women, I ask them very specific questions to understand the behavior, because I think the behavior is the most important thing, women's behavior as well as men's behavior. So when you understand the behavior, you know how to respond to it. And those are all other dynamics other than the structural barriers of actually getting child maintenance enforced.
Wow, I mean, you just expanded this conversation in like so many levels. Chelsea, you were nodding a lot when we were speaking about sort of when we were speaking about women asking for the bare minimum, and also how difficult it is to increase. And when we, how does that play up? I know. Also, again, from watching the group and then from speaking to lots of women, when the main things we come in and ask for is like, school and if there's health stuff and shelter. But often there's disparity around when we look at knowledge gaps. I know bones of contention are electricity or overhead costs. Can I call it overhead? In the NGO space, we call it overhead costs. Nobody wants to fund the overhead costs, right? And then we also see when there's backlash, and I think because you said sometimes you work with both mothers and fathers, when backlash is, I want to throw out there, we are seeking, they're asking for maintenance, but they're getting their nails done. And I come to you because I know you got how we can sort of also break that apart, that the woman also earns her own money. It's supposed to be, there's a perception, I think specifically on mothers, that all of our money is supposed to go to the children, and there must be nothing left for us. But do you see some of those things coming through? So when there's a questioning of the maintenance, it's not questioning the children's expenses, but questioning what the mother's spending money on.
It's mainly based on questioning the expenses of the mother. And I think you made the comment before we continued, is that in the middle of it all, you find that the children's needs are no longer the conversation. It's now like exterior things to the needs of the children. So you do see it actually coming up, but when like fathers often approach that, it's when they're trying to, I guess it comes from a point of also, if there's a lot of tension in a relationship, unfortunately the child is within, like it's in the middle. But you'd find that a lot of the tension comes between the two partners, between the mother and the father. That's where most conflict comes from. You'll find that the maintenance conversation for the child is only something that's done in court when they come and appear. But like between themselves and when meeting with other social service providers, you'd find that they are rather going back and forth on each other. But this is what she's using the money for, or this is why he doesn't want to give more. And I think I can just touch on what you shared about like client, or rather people going in and requesting the bare minimum. It really comes from them not knowing exactly how to do it. You'd find that they would receive the form and they would maybe just say like, school traveling allowance, and they'll put that down because in that moment they have no other thing but to think of, I don't know how to fill in the form, but I must fill in this form. So I think it really comes in a big point of them feeling supported legally, because if from a legal perspective they're not supportive, then automatically they feel even more vulnerable in making a request for maintenance.
And also just on that point also, we have seen over and over that also the judgment then stems from once you fill in that form and you take it in, and we speak about not even the magistrate or the court, like before it even gets there, the judgment that is, it's difficult to fill the form out because of the judgment that is piled onto the things that you are asking for. So, for example, is school transport really necessary, or is it a luxury? Without taking into account that maybe the mom needs to be there, it needs to construct this child's movement around around her schedule because she is looking after the child. Another thing is child care, for instance, also. So whether there's someone to look after the child after school, whether the mother has to do it, whether she works or not. I want to come back and actually dig into that, but we need to take a short break now, and we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and today we are speaking about the intersections and the complexities and a lot of the backlash about when women decide to seek child maintenance. And still with us in the studio is Felicity Guest, who is the founder of Child Maintenance Difficulty South Africa, which is a Facebook page she started 10 years ago, and also an internationally accredited financial abuse specialist, and also Chelsea Mamwell, who is a social worker with Mosaic. And we've been speaking about sort of this space, not just the legal space of going in and filling out a form and applying for maintenance, whether you are divorced or you're a single mother, but also sort of the layers. I think I can call it layers. They are just layers of shame, layers of judgment, layers of expectation that is put onto women as a result of motherhood and as a result of a history of harmful stereotypes around women and money. And so I want to jump in here because, Chelsea was speaking about, when women come in and they speak about maintenance, there's a focus on, and Felicity, you also saying, on immediate costs. So we go in. So often they ask for less than what the child needs, because we want to reposition the issue of child maintenance in the child's needs, the child's cost, what the child needs to be provided with. And so, and then also they don't feel supported. I was very interested during the break, you were saying something about many women sometimes women come to you and you're not involved in the child maintenance aspect of it, but they're trying to sort of justify these costs before they've even applied. And I've often said on the show, I feel because of the stereotypes around women as vindictive, as vengeful, as and I mean a blanket stereotype. If you initiate any sort of action, women often approach the court already in a state of mind where they're trying to ensure that they have enough evidence to justify that this request is real, that these things really happen. Is that what you find with clients?
I would find people actually coming in wanting to prove to me, as the social worker providing them with psychosocial support. Of course, it's my responsibility to do external referrals if needed. But I find that the clients would come to me first to prove to me that the child needs nappies, or the child's nappies is this price, but this is the amount I am able to cater, but I don't think they'll believe me. So I find that a lot of clients feel the need to justify why their child needs these things. And you'd find also clients who's barely making it from month to month, but they trying their best through asking donations, through trying just to make things work for the sake of their children. But when bringing up the conversation of maintenance with them, you'd find that they're not even interested in taking a legal step because of being discouraged from a point of, I don't think it's going to work. Because I think it's something you also shared, that like experiences of maintenance court is shared to others. So automatically they become discouraged that I may put this request in that my child needs milk and nappies, but they may not see it as as urgent as I do. So a lot of them actually feel like vulnerable to the point where they think they need to prove why they need these things, and if in one moment they feel like it's not acknowledged, they automatically just step back actually.
Felicity, you and I did a campaign a couple of years ago called 16 Days, 16 Fails that focused on the system, and we specifically anonymously wanted to highlight some of the engagements that women had with the system. A lot of it focused on, some of them focused on judgment, right? And so I know a lot of women who choose not to go to maintenance court, and also sometimes as a result of their first experience going in. And so some of the things I've seen on your group, for instance, is, I know one of the shocking thing was when a maintenance officer would say, well, why don't you move into a one-bedroom place, right? Or why don't, so they try, so before it even goes to court, they're trying to reduce those expenses, or they're trying to make the expenses feel as if it is extravagant, or I just want to, you know, in your long experience, and I've seen some long threads on that Facebook group, maybe we can just chat about this thread of judging the expenses and how that comes across and what that looks like.
If we start at the point of them completing the form, and unless they get assistance, they're inadequately completed. You know, just like simple things like incidentals. I need touch-up money, or there's a civvies day, or whatever. And if we look at those, are excluded by and large, your out-of-pocket expenses. So you can see the things that are ignored. So once they actually get called, once they're in front of the maintenance officer, often the first thing that they hear is a question asked to the father: how much can you afford? And that's immediately an imbalance of power, because he at that point thinks, I can determine how much I'm willing to pay. And I think that with the process we need to really look at our whole maintenance system, is it should become an administrative process, much like the Australian system. And I believe we can adapt it to the South African ecosystem, because it would take out a lot of the emotional aspects. And I say that if you end up in the maintenance courts, there is a form of abuse. Because if people understand and do what is morally correct, they would pay, whether the court tells them to or not. They would understand the children's needs and they would do it. And there are many who do that. So if you're having to end up in court and argue and fight about it, there's an imbalance of power, because somebody's got the money and somebody's having to ask for it. And also that the system actually, in my opinion, forgets about the best interests of the children, which is the premise of the Maintenance Act. Because even like when they come and see you, it's about the parents. And so all of this takes place in front of the maintenance officer, and a lot of them are not properly trained. So they are trained by the person who was there, who has their own opinions and prejudices and biases. Those are passed on. And that's what women often say. The experiences are, their dignity is infringed on several times, just through the inquisitorial process of trying to establish what the children's needs are, and that's what's supposed to happen. What are the children's needs? And then look at affordability of both parents, and then it is supposed to be proportionate to one's means. There's this myth that both parents have to contribute 50-50. And we see this in divorce agreements as well, where there will be a maintenance cash amount, and then it's additional expenses must be shared 50-50. Well, how is that a thing? Because and generally women, we know this, women earn less than men, whether they have children or not. If you are the primary parent and you're carrying the bulk of the expenses anyway, now you're still required to pay 50-50 for additional expenses. That's not equitable. And if we look at trying to correct the inherent imbalances of the past, We're never going to do that if our maintenance system does not function properly and people are not properly trained. Because most people go, I was abused more by the system than what I was by the person that I'm trying to get financial support from, because they don't understand the abuse. So it's not just money. When you're sitting in that office, for example, women have protection orders, not necessarily for physical abuse. So does she, if she's having to do a first application or if there are arrears, how willing is she going to be to go to court? Because she knows she has to face the perpetrator. I have many women who speak about they would rather not go. I had one woman in particular who had a protection order because he beat her up pretty badly. And she said, I have a protection order, what do I do when I go to court? And I said, first of all, you pick your chair up and you move it when you get into the office. Because your protection order states you shouldn't actually even be in the same room, okay? So make the maintenance officer aware that you have a protection order and move your chair so that you're a little bit more comfortable, because then you are able at least to speak. And she did that, and the maintenance officer, who was a female, said, what are you doing? She said, I'm moving my chair because I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him. And she said, I have a protection order against him. And she goes, it's not valid in my office. And besides that, it's only valid for 3 months. And she said to me, I will never go back to court again. Never, ever, ever. So whether you have a protection order or not. And I often say that men get very defensive when they hear these conversations. And I ask them to pause and go, this is not necessarily a blame, because how much of this have you been socialized to be like? And you've never stopped to interrogate your own behavior that has been so socially acceptable that is now under scrutiny because you're no longer together. Stop and have a look at your own behavior, because, and that's with understanding. It's not a blame, it's understanding. Can you behave, can you think differently, because this is not working for you and it's causing your children harm. People often say, don't talk about money issues about children. Whether you talk about them or not, children know. They know. You know, mothers get tired of asking and say, don't ask me, ask your father. And it's the tone. And I don't want to ask them because it's just going to cause fights, because the father is going to phone the mother and go, why are you telling the child to do this? And then she goes, well, I'm too scared. You always say no to me, but you won't say no to your child. So there's all of these issues. And that's where I say we lose the best interest of the child.
So I'm going to come in there, because that's actually where I wanted to get to before we finish, before we run out of time. And I just wanted to come to Chelsea and just ask, so thank you for bringing that up. Common scenario, right? And we can understand how that happens and where it happens in the conflict. I love that you say children know, even if you don't explicitly tell them, but those comments like ask your father, or I don't have money because your daddy didn't pay the maintenance, or specifically even bringing in you know, asking the child to ask to avoid confrontation or to get to a yes. So if we wanted to bring this issue back to the child, then there are these, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I didn't want to overtly, like a lot of parents don't overtly want to include the children in that fight or that cycle, but it comes through. Chelsea, what might be the best way to navigate a maintenance space with the children? Do you think it's something that, I mean, depending on the age of the child, to try to be transparent about? Do we have to be more hypervigilant of our emotions, our tone, or the types of things we say? And I will just acknowledge also here, because my friends and I speak a lot about that, the unfairness of then also having the other layer of being the person that must do the work to manage that as well. It is emotional labor. But ultimately, you know, this show was sparked by a Facebook post where a mother was saying, I have to go and get maintenance. I'm worried about the pain that my children will have to go through. And it was that more than anything else, more than the conflict, more than the fear of the courts. It was like, I'm worried about the pain that my children will have to endure through this process. And so I really also wanted to come on and acknowledge that we're thinking about that. managing that also, that is additional emotional labor?
Yeah.
And what are some good guidelines for navigating that space?
I think the best way to navigate it, especially when there's children involved, of course you get your different age groups, like your 3-month, the baby doesn't even know the value of money yet. But what I've come to know is that we think children are not aware, but surprisingly they're very smart and aware. They can easily pick up when there's tension in a room, when there's tension between their parents. But to be honest, I think the best thing that can be done to navigate the conversation of maintenance, or let's say divorce takes place and the mother needs to request maintenance, I think the best thing to do is to be transparent with the children. And helping them understand the legal process of it, not to help them see that they're becoming a burden. Because actually what I was sharing with you is that a lot of children become, they could become angry at their parents, they could feel, I think, less loved as a child because they see themselves just as a conversation of money between my mom and dad, rather than seeing that these two people are trying to work together to surround you with the care that you need. But I honestly think the best thing could be is to be transparent with children and speaking to them about the legal purpose of it. It's not because they are the one that's being used to request money from your father or from your mother, but helping them see the legal aspect of it. And I think also being mindful of the type of words you use when it's discussing it with the child. But I think as parents, the most important thing would be is to not involve your child in the process of the maintenance. Yes, you can educate them on it, but I don't think it's best, even for their development emotionally, mentally, as a child, to be the one who's asking, like, okay, mom said you didn't give the money yet, when will you be giving it? Because that's very traumatizing to a child, like itself. I think for children itself to have their parents separated is a painful process. If they are even old enough to like fully understand what's happening. But I think to bring the conversation of money in, it can make the child feel very actually like hostile. So I think the best way that one could actually deal with that, I think it's sincerely having a conversation with the child. Because oftentimes we think children are too immature to understand, and rightfully so, it's based on age. But I think if one really sits them down and help them see that they're not the problem, it's just the legal action that must take place, I think it could be dealt with much better rather than making the child run between parents. And actually, if that's what happens, you'll find that there's tension between the child and the father, or child and the mother, depending on who's the one requesting maintenance, because they feel as though their parent may look at them as this responsibility of just getting money all the time. So I think that's very important for the child's emotional development, even as an individual.
Thank you. Felicity, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, because, I mean, how does that impact on the child's understanding about money? You know, if we just look at it like, whether you speak to kids about it or not, what relationship do they develop around money? If you take it back to there, you know, that there's tension, I'm a burden, it's like I have to, all the negative stuff around it, and those feelings and relationships with money go a lot further and have impact much greater in your life. But if we look at the Z versus Z case law from 2022, which was a case on appeal, the father wanted to pay his adult children directly because they were of age, they were 18, age of majority. And it was taken on appeal because the court said, no, you'll pay the mother, and he took it on appeal. And the appeal court said that even adult children do not have the emotional capacity to have to navigate the court system. And they emphasized the impact that would have on the relationship between the child and the parent. And we're talking about like 18, 19 kids who are tertiary education particularly. So if we just play that back to younger kids, kids know the mother goes to court, has an expectation maintenance will be resolved. That's on the back of there's no money, there's no food, school fees haven't been paid or whatever. She goes to court and it's postponed. Whether the mother says anything or not, she comes back and the kids pick up her disappointment. Or they go, well, did the court give you money? So you've explained the court process. They have an expectation. Have we got money? Is Dad going to pay us? I'm sorry, it was postponed. But the woman is expected to absorb this, to protect the children from all of that. Yet she herself is battling to maintain herself. Not just does it impact on the family, she has to get up and go to work tomorrow. It impacts on her work because all she's doing is sitting there, is going, the court let me down. How am I going to get through this week? What is going to happen at the next court case? So, and corporates are completely unaware. Can I have leave? I think it's going to be resolved, and it's a mess.
We've had women who use up all of their leave just for court systems, right?
Yeah. It's a mess.
Yeah. And so we've got 2 minutes left before we need to go to break, but I just wanted to ask advice then, from your perspective of managing and going through all of these cases and reading through like all of these comments and learning from other people's experiences. Would you also just sit down with them, try and be as transparent as possible? Good.
I think that children know, and children should know, what you expose them to and what you tell them depends. Because we have an expectation that everyone has emotional maturity. And, I think I'm not going to say you need to do this and do this, because if women are incapable or don't have the skills to do that they feel shame and guilt that they're not enough.
Yeah.
I think that with what you have and where you are, to do the best that you can to protect your children, but also to have the courage to continue pursuing trying to get it, the financial support, because it has an impact on you immediately, it has an impact on your family, it has an impact on the communities, and it impacts much later on in your years.
Chelsea, we have 1 minute left. Do you want to add something before we go to break?
I think for me, I really just think it's important that one communicates with children rather than putting them within the position of blame or using them as the tool to get the money. I just think in conversations like this, it's just important to understand the child's development could be at stake based on how I choose to deal with it. So I think that's something that I really stand for.
I think that's great, and I think that's something great for us to just keep in mind when we think about every interaction. But also want to say, if we do get to points where we snap and whatever, as mothers we always say, forgive ourselves. It's okay to apologize and try to correct. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on and sharing with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So we are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we have been speaking about the intersections and emotional complexities that women experience when they are seeking child maintenance. Now, there was a lot of things said today, but one of the main things we wanted to do was, when parents find themselves in the middle of a child maintenance case, that we bring the focus back to the child, what the child needs. And I loved specifically, and I want to bring out just what Felicity Guest had said earlier, when she said providing for a child is not just about money. It is about thinking about the child, what they need in all aspects, social, financial, psychological, and trying to provide that and working together to make sure that the child is a whole and holistic experience. Now, to end us off, we're going to look at a short video that speaks to what children need in order to be raised in a brave and a secure and a safe way. So let's have a look at that.
You have to empower girls, but you have to give complementary education for boys, that they have to be egalitarian. You have to nurture this. You have to talk to them all the time that, of course, girls can do this. You have to make movies that show that girls can do anything boys. They can drive trucks, they can be superheroes, including that, of course, you can marry Joe or Jack. You're teaching them about sexuality. This kind of work is important because masculinities is more rigid than femininities. So we allow girls a little more space to play with their identities. Boys, a lot more rigid as soon as they get to a certain age, that they can't wear certain things, they can't be pushing prams, but we allow girls to play with trucks. So you have to have this complementary work about patriarchy and about attitudes around equality for boys, girls, and other genders.
So we talk about gender a lot, Even with my son, he plays with dolls. They would tease him and say, "Hey, why are you playing with this? Why are you wearing this? Why are you wearing a skirt today?" I said, "There's nothing wrong. If he wants to play with girls, if he wants to put on a weave, it's okay. It suits him. And if we go to the shop, if he says, 'I want you to buy a doll for me, the Barbie doll with high heels,' I do that."
That was a short video on how to raise brave, safe, and secure children. And that is all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.